Think you know everything about Top Gun? Think again. Behind the iconic volleyball scene and "Take My Breath Away" lies a treasure trove of bizarre production secrets. A director fired 3 times, a tragic death that nearly shut down filming, height-boosting cowboy boots, and a romantic scene filmed months after the movie wrapped. These jaw-dropping facts reveal the chaotic, hilarious, and sometimes dark reality of making cinema's most beloved aviation blockbuster. Fact 1. Director fired 3 times. Most directors consider getting fired from a major Hollywood production to be a career-ending disaster. But Tony Scott somehow managed to get fired and rehired from Top Gun not once, not twice, but 3 separate times during filming. This unprecedented behind-the-scenes chaos reveals just how much creative tension existed between Scott's artistic vision and Paramount Pictures' commercial expectations for what would become one of 1986's biggest blockbusters. Scott's first firing came early in production, when he shot the opening aircraft carrier sequence using slow-motion photography with graduated filters, creating what he described as an artsy and dark aesthetic that clashed dramatically with the studio's desire for a more mainstream commercial look. When Paramount executives saw the dailies, they panicked and immediately forbade Scott from shooting another foot of slow-motion footage. Scott, however, continued using his preferred cinematic techniques in secret, which led to his temporary dismissal from the project. The second firing involved Kelly McGillis and Scott's approach to styling her character Charlie. According to Scott himself, he made McGillis look beautiful, but in what he admitted was a whorish way, complete with 9-inch pumps and heavy makeup that transformed her into a more sexualized version of the character. Studio executives were horrified by this interpretation and immediately took away Scott's makeup artist and the high heels, demanding that Charlie appear more down-to-earth and relatable to audiences. The third and final firing occurred when Scott made the controversial decision to pull down the helmet visors on the pilots during flight scenes. While this choice added visual authenticity and allowed viewers to see more of the sky and cockpit environment, it also obscured the faces of the film's expensive leading actors, including Tom Cruise. Paramount executives argued that audiences needed to see their stars' faces during the action sequences, leading to yet another heated confrontation with Scott. Despite these 3 firings, Scott managed to survive each dismissal and complete the film, though not without lasting tensions with the studio. The final compromise, visible in the finished movie, shows American pilots with their visors up so audiences can see their faces, while enemy pilots keep their visors down, creating a visual distinction between heroes and villains that actually enhanced the storytelling. Fact 2. Deadly flat spin tragedy. The production of Top Gun was forever marked by a real-life tragedy that claimed the life of renowned aerobatic pilot Art Scholl, whose death during filming cast a shadow over what would become one of Hollywood's most celebrated aviation movies. Scholl was hired specifically to capture the dangerous flat spin sequence that appears in the film, where Maverick and Goose's 14 Tomcat enters an uncontrollable spinning dive that ultimately leads to Goose's tragic death in the story. Art Scholl was no ordinary stunt pilot, but rather a highly experienced aerobatic performer and flight instructor who had spent decades mastering some of the most challenging maneuvers in aviation. He was flying his own Pitts S-2 camera plane, a small aircraft specially equipped with filming equipment, about 5 miles off the coast of Carlsbad, California, when the fatal accident occurred. The script called for Scholl to perform and film a flat spin, which is considered one of the most difficult and dangerous aerial maneuvers because it can quickly become unrecoverable if not executed perfectly. During the filming on September 16, 1985, Scholl radioed his final transmission to his ground spotter, saying simply, "I have a problem. I have a serious problem." Those would be the last words anyone heard from the 54-year-old pilot as his small aircraft entered a flat spin that he was unable to recover from, sending both plane and pilot plummeting into the Pacific Ocean below. Despite extensive search and rescue efforts involving the Coast Guard and other agencies, neither Scholl's body nor any wreckage from his Pitts S-2 aircraft was ever recovered from the ocean depths. The search continued for days, but the Pacific had claimed both the experienced pilot and his plane without leaving any trace behind. In honor of Art Scholl's sacrifice and his contribution to the film, the producers of Top Gun dedicated the entire movie to his memory, ensuring that his name would be forever connected to the aviation epic he died helping to create. The flat spin footage that Scholl was attempting to capture when he died was ultimately recreated using other methods, but his dedication to getting the perfect shot for the film cost him his life and serves as a sobering reminder of the real dangers faced by the pilots who make Hollywood's aviation dreams possible. Fact 3. Tom Cruise's secret height boosters. While Tom Cruise's charismatic performance as Maverick made him appear larger than life on screen, the reality behind the cameras involved a carefully orchestrated effort to disguise the significant height difference between him and his leading lady Kelly McGillis. Cruise stands at 5 feet 7 inches tall, while McGillis towers over him at 5 feet 10 inches, creating a 3-inch gap that Paramount Pictures executives found problematic for the romantic chemistry they wanted to portray between the two characters. The studio's solution was both creative and slightly absurd, requiring special accommodations from both actors throughout the entire production. Cruise was fitted with specially made cowboy boots that contained hidden lifts, adding several inches to his height and helping him appear more physically matched with his co-star during their romantic scenes. These weren't ordinary shoe lifts that could be slipped into any footwear, but rather custom-designed boots that incorporated the height-boosting technology directly into the shoe construction, making them less obvious to cameras and more comfortable for the actor to wear during long filming days. Meanwhile, Kelly McGillis had to make her own sacrifices to help create the illusion of a more balanced height pairing. According to McGillis herself, she spent the majority of their scenes together acting in her stocking feet, removing her shoes entirely to reduce her natural height advantage over Cruise. She later revealed in interviews that while she, Tom, and director Tony Scott weren't particularly bothered by the height difference, Paramount executives were extremely concerned about how the pairing would look on screen. The lengths that the production went to in order to address this height disparity extended beyond just footwear adjustments. In some scenes, McGillis was positioned further back from the camera than Cruise, creating a forced perspective that made him appear taller, while in others, the actors were filmed at different angles or sitting down to minimize the height difference altogether. This behind-the-scenes height manipulation was so successful that many viewers never noticed the significant physical difference between the two actors, allowing their on-screen romance to feel natural and believable. The custom boots became such an integral part of Cruise's Maverick costume that he continued wearing similar height-enhancing footwear in many of his subsequent films, establishing a pattern that would follow him throughout his career in Hollywood. Fact 4. The love scene was an afterthought. One of Top Gun's most memorable romantic moments, the passionate elevator and bedroom scenes between Maverick and Charlie, was never part of the original film and only exists because test audiences demanded more romance between Tom Cruise and Kelly McGillis. When Paramount held early screenings of the completed movie, viewers consistently complained that the relationship between the two main characters felt underdeveloped and lacked the steamy chemistry that audiences expected from a summer blockbuster romance. The studio's solution was to bring both actors back for additional filming. But this presented a significant challenge since production had already wrapped 5 months earlier. During those intervening months, both Cruise and McGillis had moved on to other projects, and undergone dramatic physical changes that made it difficult to seamlessly integrate new footage with the existing film. Kelly McGillis had lost approximately 60 pounds for another role, completely transforming her appearance and making it nearly impossible to match her look from the original Top Gun filming period. Tom Cruise faced his own continuity challenges. As he was already deep into filming The Color of Money, Martin Scorsese's pool hall drama, that required him to have a completely different hairstyle and physical appearance. The production team had to work around both actors' scheduling conflicts and find creative ways to mask the obvious differences in their appearances between the original footage and the hastily arranged additional scenes. The filmmakers chose to set these romantic scenes in dimly lit locations like elevators and bedrooms, using strategic lighting and camera angles to hide the fact that both actors looked noticeably different from how they appeared in the rest of the movie. Director Tony Scott also had to rely heavily on close-up shots and careful editing to create the illusion that these intimate moments were filmed at the same time as the rest of the production. Despite these technical challenges, the additional romantic scenes became some of the film's most iconic moments, particularly the elevator sequence that perfectly captures the tension between Maverick and Charlie. The bedroom scene, accompanied by Berlin's "Take My Breath Away," became one of the most memorable romantic moments in 1980s cinema, proving that sometimes the best parts of a movie can emerge from last-minute fixes to address audience feedback. Fact 5. Val Kilmer accidentally cast Matthew Modine. One of Hollywood's strangest casting stories involves how Val Kilmer's jealousy and bad attitude at a restaurant breakfast inadvertently led to Matthew Modine landing the starring role in Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket instead of Tom Cruise's Maverick in Top Gun. This bizarre chain of events began when Modine was having breakfast at a popular West Hollywood restaurant called The Source with his friend and fellow actor David Alan Grier, who had his back turned to the rest of the dining room. Modine noticed another young actor sitting about 10 feet away, who was clearly directing obscenities and hostile comments toward him. Though Modine had no idea who this person was or why he was being targeted. As Modine later recalled, he told Grier that either the guy was an actor studying a particularly aggressive monologue, or he had some kind of medical condition, because he was clearly telling Modine to go do something very inappropriate to himself, using extremely colorful language. When Grier turned around and recognized the hostile actor as Val Kilmer, he offered to introduce the two men, thinking it might resolve whatever misunderstanding was causing the tension. The introduction, however, only made things worse, as Kilmer immediately said, "Yeah, I know who you are, and I'm sick of you," before launching into a list of Modine's recent film successes, including Private School, Vision Quest, and other projects that had been raising Modine's profile in Hollywood. The conversation took a crucial turn when Kilmer accused Modine of already being cast in Stanley Kubrick's upcoming war film, saying, "Now you're doing Kubrick's film." At that point, Modine had absolutely no idea what Kilmer was talking about and had never heard of any Kubrick project, though he was aware the legendary director was working on something with Warner Brothers. This chance encounter prompted Modine to immediately call his agent from a payphone at the restaurant to ask about the mysterious Kubrick film Kilmer had mentioned. Within a month, Modine received a script for Full Metal Jacket, along with a personal note from Kubrick himself, which read, "Hello, my name is Stanley Kubrick. I'm a film director, and I wonder if you'd consider being in my film." Modine chose Kubrick's anti-war masterpiece over the Top Gun lead role, a decision that shaped both his career and cinema history in unexpected ways. Fact 6. Volleyball scene nearly got Scott fired. One of Top Gun's most iconic and culturally enduring sequences almost cost director Tony Scott his job for the fourth time, as the famous shirtless beach volleyball scene that has captivated audiences for decades was originally nothing more than a single paragraph in the screenplay. The script simply described a vicious volleyball game taking place on the naval base, with no additional details about how it should be filmed or what tone it should convey within the larger story. Scott, however, saw this brief description as an opportunity to create something much more elaborate and visually striking than what the writers had envisioned. He decided to approach the volleyball sequence like a high-end commercial or music video, complete with slow-motion photography, dramatic close-ups of glistening, oil-covered muscles, and carefully choreographed action that emphasized the athletic prowess and camaraderie of the naval aviators. The production team brought in an entire dump truck full of sand to create the perfect beach volleyball court, set up professional lighting equipment, and hired actual volleyball players as body doubles for the more complex athletic moves that the actors couldn't perform convincingly. Scott then proceeded to spend an entire filming day capturing this brief scene from multiple angles, using various camera techniques and lighting setups to create the polished, almost surreal quality that made the sequence so memorable. When Paramount executives saw the dailies from this extended volleyball shoot, they were absolutely furious with Scott for what they considered a massive waste of time and resources on such a minor plot element. According to film editor Chris Lebenzon, who worked closely with Scott on the project, the studio executives were so angry about the elaborate treatment of this simple scene that the head of production, Charlie Maguire, actually threatened to fire Scott once again, saying he was going to remove the director from the project. Scott later admitted that he approached the volleyball scene with a very specific vision in mind, describing his goal as creating what he called soft porn. The scene required no dialogue and advanced the plot only minimally, serving primarily as eye candy that showcased the physical attributes of the film's attractive young cast, while reinforcing the bonds between the competitive pilots. Fact 7. Real Viper appears as Charlie's date. Hidden in plain sight during one of Top Gun's most memorable bar scenes is a genuine naval aviation legend, whose real-life exploits were far more impressive than anything depicted in the movie itself. The older gentleman who appears as Perry, sitting with Charlie when Maverick first attempts his infamous "You've lost that lovin' feelin' serenade," is actually Rear Admiral Kenneth Pete Pettigrew, the real Navy TOPGUN instructor whose call sign Viper inspired Tom Skerritt's commanding officer character in the film. Pettigrew wasn't just serving as a technical advisor on the movie, but was also the only former TOPGUN instructor with an actual confirmed MiG kill to his name, making his brief cameo appearance particularly significant for aviation enthusiasts and military historians. During the Vietnam War, Pettigrew flew 4 Phantom jets and completed 2 combat tours aboard the USS Coral Sea, accumulating more than 325 combat missions over the course of his service in Southeast Asia. The real Viper's most dramatic moment came on May 6, 1972, while he was deployed aboard the USS Kitty Hawk during his second combat tour. Pettigrew found himself outnumbered 2-1 by North Vietnamese MiG-21 fighters, which were considered among the most advanced aircraft in the Communist forces' arsenal, and were flown by pilots trained in the Soviet Union and China. Despite being significantly outnumbered, in what should have been an extremely dangerous encounter, Pettigrew and his wingman engaged the enemy aircraft in a 90-second dogfight that ended with Pettigrew scoring a confirmed kill using an AIM-9 Sidewinder missile. After his combat service, Pettigrew joined the newly established Navy Fighter Weapons School, better known as TOPGUN, where he served as an instructor teaching the next generation of naval aviators the advanced air-to-air combat tactics that the program was designed to develop. By the time Top Gun was released in theaters in 1986, Pettigrew had transferred to the Naval Reserve but remained connected to the aviation community that had shaped his career. The fact that this decorated combat veteran and genuine TOPGUN instructor appears in the film as Charlie's date adds an extra layer of authenticity to a movie that was already working closely with the Navy to ensure realistic portrayals of naval aviation culture and procedures. Fact 8. Berlin's band nearly split over the song. The massive success of "Take My Breath Away" nearly destroyed the band Berlin from the inside, as the song that would become their biggest hit and win both an Academy Award and a Golden Globe created such intense friction among band members that it threatened to tear the group apart permanently. The conflict centered around the fact that "Take My Breath Away" was written entirely by outsiders, composer Giorgio Moroder and lyricist Tom Whitlock, rather than by Berlin's own songwriter and bassist John Crawford, who had been responsible for creating the band's previous material. When Moroder approached Berlin about recording the song for Top Gun, lead singer Terry Nunn was immediately enthusiastic about the opportunity, recognizing that being featured on a major movie soundtrack could significantly boost their career and expose them to a much wider audience than their previous new wave releases had reached. However, Crawford was absolutely furious about the prospect of performing someone else's composition, telling his bandmates bluntly, "I'm not doing this, forget this guy. This is not our song," and expressing his belief that the band should only perform music they had written themselves. The record label ultimately forced the issue by making it clear that Berlin had no choice in the matter, telling Crawford and the other reluctant band members, "You're doing this. You need all the help you can get. This is a movie. Regardless of whether it does well or not, your song will be on it." Even their band manager, Perry Watts Russell, was skeptical about the song's commercial potential, making what he probably thought was a safe bet by promising that he would shave his head completely bald if "Take My Breath Away" ever reached #1 on the charts. When the song not only hit #1 but stayed there and became one of the biggest hits of 1986, Watts Russell had to follow through on his promise and shave off all his hair, while Crawford found himself in the deeply frustrating position of having to perform a song he despised at every single live concert for years to come. The success of "Take My Breath Away" meant that audiences expected to hear it at every Berlin performance, forcing Crawford to play and sing a composition he had never wanted to record in the first place, creating ongoing tension that would eventually contribute to the band's breakup just 1 year after their biggest triumph. Fact 9. Diet Pepsi pioneered movie product placement. Top Gun made entertainment history by becoming the first major Hollywood blockbuster to include a commercial advertisement on its home video release, fundamentally changing how studios would approach the emerging VHS market and creating a new revenue stream that would influence the industry for years to come. When Paramount Pictures was preparing to release Top Gun on videocassette in March of 1987, Diet Pepsi approached the studio with an unprecedented proposition that would benefit both companies while offering consumers a significant price break. The deal was brilliantly simple in concept, but revolutionary in execution. Diet Pepsi would pay Paramount to include a specially produced Top Gun-themed commercial at the beginning of every VHS tape, and in exchange, this sponsorship revenue would allow the studio to sell the movie for the remarkably low price of $26.95. This price point was absolutely groundbreaking for the time, as it represented the lowest retail cost ever offered for a major new movie release on home video, making it significantly more affordable for consumers who wanted to own rather than rent the film. The Diet Pepsi commercial itself was a carefully crafted piece of advertising that perfectly captured the high-energy aviation-themed spirit of the movie while promoting the soft drink brand. The ad featured a young pilot character called Mustang, who bore a striking resemblance to Tom Cruise's Maverick, complete with similar attitude problems and cocky demeanor that made him instantly recognizable as a Top Gun-inspired character. In the commercial's plot, Mustang's fellow pilots decide to play a prank on him by gluing his Diet Pepsi bottle into his aircraft's cup holder, but the resourceful pilot responds by performing an inverted flight maneuver to pour his drink into a coffee cup, maintaining both his rebel image and his commitment to staying trim with the sugar-free beverage. This innovative marketing partnership was backed by a massive $8 million promotional campaign that included television advertising to promote both the VHS release and the Diet Pepsi brand, creating a synergistic effect that benefited all parties involved. The strategy proved so successful that Top Gun became the best-selling VHS in industry history based on pre-orders alone, with over 1.9 million units ordered before the tape even hit store shelves, ultimately selling a record-breaking 2.9 million copies total. Fact 10. The Navy recruitment myth. One of the most persistent and widely repeated claims about Top Gun's cultural impact is that the movie caused a 500% spike in Navy recruitment, but official military statistics reveal this dramatic figure to be completely false, making it one of Hollywood's most enduring myths that has been accepted as fact for nearly 4 decades. The true story behind Navy recruitment numbers in 1986 tells a much more modest tale that demonstrates how easily exaggerated statistics can become accepted wisdom when they sound impressive enough to be memorable. According to actual data published by the U.S. Navy's Recruitment Division, which tracks enlistment figures by fiscal year from October 1st to September 30th, 94,878 people enlisted in the Navy during the 1985-86 fiscal year when Top Gun was released in theaters. This represented an increase from 87,593 new enlistments the previous year, which calculates to exactly an 8.3% boost in Navy recruits, not the claimed jump of 500% that would have required nearly 500,000 additional enlistments. The mythical 500% figure becomes even more questionable when examining recruitment trends in the years immediately following the film's release. Navy enlistment actually fell by 2.1% in 1986-87. Which was the first full fiscal year after Top Gun hit theaters, before rising again in the following 2 years to reach an 8-year high of 95,186 new recruits in 1988-89, suggesting that any impact from the movie was relatively short-lived. The earliest reference researchers have found for the 500% claim appears in a 2004 book titled Operation Hollywood: How the Pentagon Shapes and Censors the Movies, where author David Robb wrote that according to the Navy, recruitment of young men wanting to become naval aviators went up 500% after the film was released, but the book provided no actual source or documentation for this statistic. Some variations of the myth suggest the increase applied specifically to naval aviator applications rather than general Navy recruitment, but even this narrower interpretation lacks supporting evidence from official military records. Contemporary newspaper articles from 1986 mentioned that the movie helped drive interest in the Navy, but fact-checkers have been unable to locate any source from that year that suggested recruitment rose by anywhere near 500%, indicating that this impressive-sounding statistic was likely created years later and then repeated so frequently that it became accepted as historical fact. Fact 11. Fake fighter jets and missing MiGs. Throughout Top Gun, the American pilots repeatedly engage enemy aircraft identified as MiG-28s, but aviation enthusiasts immediately recognize that this aircraft designation was completely fictional, as no such plane has ever existed in the Soviet or Russian Air Force inventory. The filmmakers created this imaginary enemy fighter because the actual naming convention used by the Soviet military would have made their choice obvious to anyone familiar with military aircraft, since all MiG fighters have historically been assigned odd numbers like the MiG-15, MiG-21, MiG-23, and MiG-29. The decision to invent a non-existent enemy aircraft stemmed from the practical impossibility of obtaining actual Soviet fighter jets for filming during the height of the Cold War in 1985 and 86. Even if the producers had wanted to use the real MiG-29, which was the newest Soviet fighter in production at the time, and would have been of great interest to American intelligence analysts, like Charlie's character, there was absolutely no way that the Soviet Union would have cooperated with an American military propaganda film by providing their most advanced aircraft for Hollywood cameras. Faced with this challenge, the production team turned to American-built Northrop V Tiger aircraft, which were painted black with red stars on their rudders to create the illusion of enemy fighters. The 5 was actually a logical choice for this deception because these aircraft were already being used by the U.S. military as opposing force or aggressor aircraft in training exercises, where American pilots would practice combat maneuvers against planes that simulated enemy capabilities and tactics. The 5 Tigers that portrayed the fictional MiG-28s in Top Gun were flown by actual U.S. Navy and Marine Corps pilots who specialized in this type of adversary training, meaning that the enemy pilots threatening Maverick and his fellow Top Gun students were actually American military personnel pretending to be hostile forces. This created the somewhat surreal situation where American pilots were essentially playing the role of Soviet aviators trying to shoot down other American pilots who were playing themselves. The black paint scheme and red star markings applied to these 5 aircraft were designed to make them appear more menacing and foreign to audiences, while also helping to disguise the fact that they were actually American-made fighters rather than genuine Soviet hardware, allowing the filmmakers to create believable air-to-air combat sequences without revealing the practical limitations imposed by Cold War politics. Fact 12. Matthew Modine rejected Maverick for political reasons. Matthew Modine was offered the starring role of Pete Maverick Mitchell in Top Gun before Tom Cruise was even considered for the part, but the rising young actor deliberately turned down what would become one of the most iconic characters in 1980s cinema because of his strong anti-war political beliefs and his conviction that the film would serve as military propaganda during the Reagan administration. Modine, who was establishing himself as a serious dramatic actor with films like Streamers and Vision Quest, viewed Top Gun as a dangerous glorification of American military power that conflicted with his personal pacifist principles. In interviews years later, Modine explained that he recognized Top Gun would likely become a massive box office success, but he was uncomfortable with what he saw as the film's jingoistic approach to military themes, during a time when President Ronald Reagan was pursuing an aggressive foreign policy stance against the Soviet Union. Modine felt that many movies of the 1980s were simply pointing fingers at Russia and portraying them as villains without exploring the complex realities of international relations or the human costs of warfare. The actor was particularly troubled by the way the script placed blame for the death of American pilots on Russian forces, viewing this as an oversimplified and potentially harmful portrayal of Cold War tensions that could influence public opinion in favor of military action. Modine believed that Hollywood had a responsibility to present more nuanced perspectives on war and conflict, rather than creating what he considered to be recruitment tools for the U.S. military. Instead of accepting the Top Gun role, Modine chose to work with legendary director Stanley Kubrick on Full Metal Jacket, a decision that aligned much better with his political beliefs and artistic goals. Kubrick's anti-war film offered a brutal and unflinching examination of military training and the psychological effects of combat, presenting exactly the kind of complex and critical perspective on warfare that Modine felt was missing from Top Gun's more celebratory approach to military service. When asked decades later if he regretted turning down such a career-defining role, Modine remained firm in his conviction, stating, "Not at all, not for 1 second," and explaining that working with Kubrick on Full Metal Jacket provided him with an irreplaceable education in filmmaking that he valued far more than the commercial success that Top Gun would have brought to his career. Fact 13. Charlie's house became a pie shop. The charming Victorian cottage that served as Kelly McGillis's character Charlie's home in Top Gun underwent a remarkable transformation in 2020 when the historic San Diego residence was physically relocated and converted into a pie shop called Hi Pie, ending its decades-long run as one of the city's most recognizable movie landmarks. The house, officially known as the Graves House but commonly referred to by locals and tourists as the Top Gun House, had been drawing film fans to its original location at 102 North Pacific Street since the movie's release in 1986. Paramount Pictures rented this distinctive folk Victorian and Queen Anne-style cottage in 1985 to serve as the exterior of Charlie's residence, where several key romantic scenes between Maverick and Charlie were filmed, including the memorable moments where Tom Cruise's character arrives on his motorcycle for their dinner date. The house became so closely associated with the film that it developed into an unofficial tourist attraction, with Top Gun fans regularly making pilgrimages to San Diego specifically to see and photograph the location where some of their favorite movie moments were captured. However, the house's story became more complicated because not all of Charlie's scenes were actually filmed at the Graves house itself. The backyard scenes featuring Charlie and Maverick were shot at a different property located at 112 First Street, also known as Seagaze Drive, which was positioned directly behind the main house used for the exterior shots, creating a composite filming location that combined two separate properties to create the illusion of a single residence. In May of 2020, the Graves house faced an uncertain future that led to its dramatic relocation to a new address at 250 North Pacific Street in San Diego. Rather than allowing this piece of cinema history to be demolished or fall into disrepair, new owners decided to preserve the structure by transforming it into Hi Pie, a bakery specializing in handcrafted pies that pays homage to its Hollywood heritage. The renovation process carefully maintained many of the architectural features that made the house recognizable to Top Gun fans, while adapting the interior spaces to function as a commercial bakery and retail establishment. This creative reuse ensures that the building continues to serve the San Diego community while preserving its connection to one of the most beloved films of the 1980s. Fact 14. Height differences drove casting concerns. Behind the scenes at Paramount Pictures, studio executives were deeply troubled by the physical pairing of Tom Cruise and Kelly McGillis, with some producers expressing serious concerns that McGillis appeared more like Cruise's mother than his romantic interest, due to their significant differences in both height and age. These worries went far beyond the typical Hollywood obsession with leading man stature and reflected genuine anxiety about whether audiences would accept the romantic chemistry between two actors whose physical characteristics seemed fundamentally mismatched for a conventional love story. The concerns were not entirely unfounded from a purely visual standpoint, as McGillis stood 5 feet 10 inches tall compared to Cruise's 5 feet 7 inches. And she was also 5 years older than her co-star, having been born on July 9, 1957, while Cruise was born on July 3, 1962. Producer David Paul Kirkpatrick later wrote about the studio's hesitation regarding McGillis, revealing that Paramount executives were genuinely worried about how the pairing would appear on screen and whether the height and age differences would undermine the believability of their romantic relationship. The studio's anxiety was particularly intense because they had already committed to McGillis based on her previous work in the Harrison Ford film Witness, where she had demonstrated both dramatic range and screen presence that made her an attractive choice for the role of Charlie. However, the producers, Tom Cruise himself, director Tony Scott, and studio head Ned Tannen initially refused to conduct screen tests between Cruise and McGillis to see how they would look together on camera, preferring to trust their instincts rather than risk discovering that the pairing might not work visually. Kirkpatrick noted that the creative team believed that if the fictional relationship between Maverick and Charlie worked on screen from a storytelling perspective, then the physical reality of the actors' appearances would become irrelevant to audiences, a philosophy that prioritized emotional truth over conventional Hollywood beauty standards. The studio's concerns about McGillis looking too maternal compared to Cruise were ultimately proven wrong, as their on-screen chemistry became one of the film's most memorable elements. Despite these initial worries, the final film successfully sold the romance between Maverick and Charlie, proving that strong performances and compelling character development could overcome physical mismatches that might have seemed problematic during the casting process. Fact 15. Maverick's watch mysteriously vanishes. One of the most noticeable continuity errors in Top Gun occurs during the iconic beach volleyball scene, where Tom Cruise's wristwatch appears and disappears multiple times throughout the sequence, creating a distracting visual inconsistency that sharp-eyed viewers have been spotting for decades. The watch serves an important plot function in the scene because Maverick checks it several times to remind both himself and the audience that he has an upcoming romantic dinner date with Charlie, making its presence crucial for maintaining the story's timeline and Maverick's motivation for eventually leaving the game. The continuity problem becomes obvious when watching the sequence carefully, as Cruise can clearly be seen wearing his watch in certain shots, particularly when he deliberately looks down at his wrist to check the time because he's concerned about being late for his date with Kelly McGillis's character. However, during many of the actual volleyball action shots where Maverick is diving for balls, spiking, or celebrating with his teammates, the watch completely vanishes from his wrist without any explanation, only to mysteriously reappear in subsequent close-up shots. This type of continuity error typically occurs when scenes are filmed out of sequence over multiple days, or when actors remove personal items like watches or jewelry between takes for comfort or safety reasons during physical activity. In the case of the volleyball scene, the demanding athletic requirements of the game likely made it impractical or uncomfortable for Cruise to wear the watch during the more intense action sequences, but the editing process failed to account for these inconsistencies when assembling the final cut. The watch problem is compounded by the fact that the volleyball sequence was filmed using numerous camera angles and multiple takes to capture all the athletic action, celebration moments, and character interactions that Tony Scott wanted to include in his elaborate treatment of what was originally just a single paragraph in the script. With so much footage to choose from and such a focus on creating dynamic visual excitement, the continuity of small details like Maverick's watch apparently became a lower priority for the editing team. The error has become something of a cult favorite among movie mistake enthusiasts and Top Gun fans who enjoy spotting the various continuity problems throughout the film, turning what might have been an embarrassing oversight into a charming quirk that adds to the movie's enduring appeal for detail-oriented viewers.